One
Hi
more
there.
second.
Hey, Willow.
Please get Jay in here. Okay. I think we're ready to get started. So I'm just going to go over the format for anybody that hasn't been able to join with us before. So we're going to start by getting some questions at first. Feel free to raise your hand. I'll be able to see that. I'll call on you. And then we'll get a list of questions, and then we'll kind of go through and talk and deep dive into those questions. Feel free to chat too. Jay's manning the chat, and he's going to bubble up questions and even comments to me. It's great. It's a great way to engage if you really agree with something that someone's saying, or you want to add a little bit more information or a little bit more resources. So that's kind of how we're gonna start out. So I'm gonna go ahead and open the floor up for any questions that anybody has. Again, our topic is focusing on getting out of the single-threaded relationships. Kind of how do we manage, maintain, and engage outside of that single-threaded relationship. I know with the SMB culture, sometimes you're just dealing with maybe the end user or one mid-level manager. So how do you really diversify and create a relationship map? Anybody got any questions they'd like to discuss?
Why don't you start, Steve Schwartz?
How did I know you were going to call on me today? I think, it's interesting. I've done some of this work in an enterprise space before, and certainly it's easier to sort of like draw a model of what your customers' hierarchy looks like, management teams and things like that. Mm-hmm. In an SMB world, I definitely find it more difficult to figure out sort of who can derive value from your product, even if they're not direct users or sort of direct champions. So that's something that, like, how do you identify, who are the sort of adjacent people that you can provide some level of value to? Sort of the question.
Mm-hmm. I like that question. Makes sense. How about anybody else? I'm going to start calling on people. Oh, okay. Looks like Brian Hartley.
Yeah, so my question is just around, our customers probably manage or have visibility into a lot of different SaaS tools. So what are some of the small things that you have had success with that make you stand out amongst all the other tools that your stakeholders or other team members may have access to in their environment?
I like that one. Kind of like tiny tips and tricks.
Yeah.
How about Kathleen? Kathleen?
Yes. So my question is, how do you, I think, it kind of is along lines of single-threaded relationship, but how do you build relationships with people when you don't have a budget to go visit them in person? Like if you've got like a large client base, but your company is cash strapped or young and they don't have the funds to travel. So how do you build that relationship? Because I think that, in person is, I think, naturally going to come up because that is one of the solutions.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially now. I know a lot of people probably relied on that before, even if they had the budget, right? Can't do it right now. How about Regan?
Yeah, so one of the challenges we face in our sector, or in the automotive sector, so we work with a lot of champions that are like marketing directors and stuff, and they try to keep us at a distance from their bosses, or their bosses are way too busy trying to like maintain their sales floor. So I mean, we've come up with some ways to convince them that like having an executive business review is important, but I just like to see other people's feedback, especially if the champion is like actually trying to keep us away from the boss, and obviously It's our goal to get multi-threaded there, because those GMs at the dealerships, they cut things knee-jerk reaction like every day. So
right, that's a great one. I see that a ton, actually. I'm going to call on a couple more people if I don't have any hands raised. Or Jay, did we have any questions in the chat?
No, not yet, but it looks like Matt has his.
Oh, yep. We got some more hands raised. I scared you guys.
Yeah,
How about
hi.
Matt?
I think it's a tangential question, but I think it's like somewhat relevant. It's like, let's say you've started to get more than one single threaded. Like, how do people like actually measure relationship strength? So it's like, what are the metrics people are using? I'm curious to know if people are doing that firstly, and like what ways do people approach that in terms of with the key sort of stakeholders we do have relationships with. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that one. I actually want to know the answer to that. Thanks, Matt. How about Rob?
Yep, I've actually got a couple of things that pop up. One is, I think, as I see, as we move down market to smaller customers, you know, how do we get sales to make the effort to share and identify key people that could be, you know, that could be champions or people we want to build relationships with. I find the smaller the customer, the less likely sales is going to make the time to provide that initial information. And then the second one was in our space, you know, we've got fairly fast turnover at our customers. So people, you know, moving on from one job to the next. So we could think we're multi-threaded and quickly find that we're single-threaded because a key person has left. And you know, how do we keep a good pulse on, you know, who's moving where?
Right. That makes sense. So we've got 3 more people with their hand raised, and I'll take those questions, and then maybe we can start answering things. Sincercy, sorry if I mispronounced that.
Oh, no problem. It's Sansire. I actually had some thoughts to questions that were, or you can call me Sansi because Sansire is just a little too much. But yeah, no, I had some thoughts.
I've heard your name before. Let me save you, and I'll pose the first question to you if that works.
Oh, awesome. Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah. Lauren Mecca.
Hi. I would love to hear thoughts on different types and goals of relationships that you build in the SMB world. Because you can't do it all.
Give me a little bit more how you decide internally what relationships you actually need to get relationships with. Is that kind of what you're thinking about?
Yeah. So even at smaller orgs, at smaller price points in their contracts, you might, you know, go to one person for feedback on the product or the roadmap and another person for the renewal conversation. So I think there are more layers that I'd love to build my awareness of.
Yeah, and really how you break that out by segment. It's a good one. And Brian.
Yeah, I think this is a follow-on to, I think it was Matt previously, but you know, at scale, how do you gauge relationship strength and relationship health? And if there's any tools people have used to gauge that strength. I've heard of tools like people.ai. I'm not sure if other people have, you know, heard of them, used them, but I'm curious how others are kind of managing relationship strength at scale.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think a really big theme I'm hearing is how do you even identify who you need to have a relationship with? So, you know, we had the question about sales. Do you get it from sales? How do you do it internally? Should you do it by segment? So I'm hearing that as a general question. Chauncey, I'll let you start with that and see if you have any thoughts on that, and then we can kind of move forward running through the questions from there.
Oh, sure. So in the past, what we've done that may or may not be helpful, specifically, I forget who mentioned in the automotive industry or dealing with automotive dealers, I think was chatted about, where you have someone that's maybe your day-to-day user, the marketer, and they don't necessarily want to pass the relationship on to anyone else. Definitely have experienced that. I've found some tiny tactical ways to get over that. One of them is that I would put the owner or the other key stakeholder on our email reports that would go out at a certain cadence. so that they could see the activity that was happening in the dashboard. It wasn't just the marketing manager or the day-to-day user that was seeing it. That worked because they weren't sent out too often. We would batch them about once a month. So I would actually find that they really wanted to be involved, and they had questions about the reports, and they would give feedback on different goals that they had. So I would use transactional emails to our benefit, to start to trigger conversations with them. It would be hard to ask the day-to-day contact for like the opportunity to talk with, the owner or someone else in the business. I found that wasn't always the easiest thing to do. But adding them specifically to reporting, and generating those reports, was helpful. So that's one thing that I learned.
Yeah, I love that. Has anybody else had any success with engaging the higher level executives above the champion? I think I see this as a common thread with a lot of customers I work with. How about Lauren? Do you have any ideas? I know you kind of asked a question around who you decide, but I don't know if you've had any luck in this area.
Yeah, and I've had success keeping the outbound communication to a minimum, really focused around the KPIs, whether it's, we've made you money, we've saved you money, we've saved you time. I've also seen, I've entered a team when they've had too much fluff attempts at communicating with the higher stakeholders, and that can really turn them off and decrease engagement. So I think you have to be really smart with your attempts, knowing that these people are wearing multiple hats, and running a whole business.
Yeah, that can be a little tricky. You don't want to box out your champion. Kathleen, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that, the easiest way to build a relationship is the very beginning. So when you have your kickoff call, I think kickoff calls, even if you have an easy product, are really important. Make it mandatory for everybody, including, maybe especially if like, let's say you deal with like the marketing team. So not just marketing manager, make sure the marketing director is there. CMO, maybe they're not going to be there, but if you set the expectation that, you want to know the team and the goals, it's really important, because if you frame it in the vein of, hey, I want to meet everybody so I can learn your goals, so I can like help you guys succeed, how are they going to say no to that? And then you'll at least know everyone and can keep them warm in the background, even if they're not power users of your product. So if you start at there, then that's going to help prevent the number one thing, churn.
Yeah, I think someone else touched on that for the sales process. Jeffrey, do you have any ideas around this one?
Yeah, so everyone's hit on a bunch of good ideas. One that I've seen successful too is like, I almost think about it like internally. So I try to be the person bubbling up issues or challenges I've run into. Like, hey, I've been working with the team. I know this is an important project. We're actually stalled on it. And I've been working with Tim and John on it. I'm not sure what else to do. Like, could you help me understand what's going on and where I can support you guys better? So it's like I feed it up, and then I've had people reach out and be like, oh my God, thank you for letting me know. Like, yeah, let's get on a call. And then they end up starting like potentially multiple threads or help push it forward. So it's like that asking for help, but by being someone who's like, hey, I'm helping you guys. It'd be the same thing if you were on their team. You're like, hey boss, I need help. And it tends to just trigger that like psychology of like, oh, helping people. It's what you normally do when you communicate too.
Yeah, I like, a thread I'm actually hearing is kind of continued engagement. The idea that you can send reports, you're proactively and continually engaging with them. You're engaging with them when you need help, rather than just reaching out to them when you like want to do an EBR or a QBR and you don't really have a relationship. So that's kind of one thing I'm hearing. One thing I kind of want to go back to, so Stacey, I'm going to call on you next, is how do you even identify who you should have relationships with? From the SMB side, this is pretty different than enterprise, because you don't have as complex of a map at the organization, but also you probably don't have as many resources and much time. So I don't know, Stacey, if you have any thoughts on that. Sorry, I know I kind of took a pivot.
Yeah. One of the things, I'm actually going to not answer that one because I wasn't prepared for that one.
That's fine.
Yes, to Kathleen's point, we do start out expecting to have a communication with the senior level, and very early in that onboarding process, identify that the cadence we have with our day-to-day users is going to be different than the cadence that we have in communicating with our senior level folks. So during the onboarding, we identify that regular cadence is probably monthly, whereas the senior level is going to be more of a quarterly basis, making sure that we understand from them what kind of reporting. We have different types of reporting. So we have the executive reporting that is more of an aggregation of events over time and the implications, how they compare in industry, is their security improving? And then what we do on a the monthly basis is really much more granular. So it always keeps us moving in a parallel path. So we keep both of those relationships. One's more frequent, one is less frequent, but high level. And that seems to have been working pretty well. The other thing, one of our CSMs brought to my attention just this week was if she has an EBR scheduled, and for some reason at the last minute the executive cancels, they get busy, she will not do the EBR. She will cancel it and wait till that person is available, really sending that message that no, this is really important and we're not going to do this unless that person's available.
Gotcha. I like that, kind of holding the customer accountable too. We all know in customer success sometimes that actually helps your relationship, which is interesting. Nathan Peterson, do you have any thoughts on this? Surprise, maybe? I don't know if you're on mute.
Nathan's on mute.
Okay. I think you might be on mute.
There we go.
But we can go ahead.
You guys hear me?
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Sorry. So pivoting a little bit back to your question, Willow, about how do we know who to connect with? One of the things our company has been doing has been from the sales side of things to try to immediately get who those decision maker peoples are right off the bat over to the CS team, so that when our team goes in and starts talking with these people, we know like, hey, you want to cancel, you want to churn, like we know who we have to ask for. But then the way we have our system set up is that we put a lot of the onus on the user to create the additional users and to tag those users with who they are. So, this is a financial officer, this is a marketing person. And so by kind of doing that, we allow them to tell us a lot of information that we wouldn't necessarily know unless we were gathering that information. And if they don't give us that information, then our support team and our success team is also going to be asking those questions as we have conversations, as we're like, hey, Susie, good to talk with you. Remind me again, what's your role at the company, right? What are you in charge of? What do you kind of take care of? And so kind of like a two-pronged approach, right? One, automatically try to get them to give us that information right off the bat. And then a second one to kind of do that follow-up of kind of that relationship building of really discovery as we continue to have those relationships build and grow.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a second question to add on to kind of what you said. What tool do you use? So does the salesperson put it in the same tool that you use throughout the relationship journey? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's definitely part of kind of the opportunity that the salespeople kind of document really carefully for us. Hey, this is part of the opportunity, is identifying who are those people. And our product is one that it can kind of be sold to different people inside the organization. So we have to kind of figure out who we're talking to figure out what they're going to be. That process of how do we make sure that once we've identified that person, we're giving them reports and visualization of things that matter to them, right? Like I could say, hey, this matters to you, and it doesn't matter to them. And they're going to be like, okay, don't care. So it's that kind of growing of how do we kind of identify what those users are looking for in general, and maybe specifically how we can do those kind of call outs. So yeah, that's part of the sales process though for really selling the account. It's something they have to do before it gets sent over to us.
Gotcha. Jay, I'm going to take a little bit of a pause and see if we've had anything in the chat that you kind of want to bubble up.
Yeah, there's a couple of really interesting points in here. So Amanda mentioned that they have found success in her company. And Amanda, I don't know what company that is. Maybe you can comment after this. But in approaching the C-suite further into the subscription, when you have sort of a project or a success under your belt already, and then show them the ROI and to get to other places. I thought that was a good point. And then this is one that I really like from Matt Timmons as well. So helping companies understand how they stack up to other companies that look like sort of similar to them, benchmarking. And I've also, I'll just take that a step further, I've also used contacts in one company to maybe connect with another company directly. If I need one of my clients to do something differently, then I'll introduce them to another client who's doing it the way I already want them to do it. And so they can sort of learn from one another, and it's somebody who's actually sitting in the seat as opposed to me as a software provider trying to tell them how to do that. So I just thought those were both good points by Amanda and Matt. And Amanda, I don't know if you want to add anything on to that. It would be cool to hear a little bit more about how you guys are coaching your CS team to do that, if you're open to sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can share a little bit more about that. So we offer organizations a learning and productivity platform in the architectural, engineering, and construction space. So we work with a really wide variety type of organizations and size. But when I find that I can't get executive engagement, and of course our target is to get that as early as possible, but when our team finds and when I find that we can't get that engagement, what we'll generally try to do is structure some sort of project to generate value for the organization and measure ROI. And then in that case, once we've completed that project, so we've executed, we've helped that team achieve their goals, whatever those are, in our best case scenarios, the champion we're working with internally will request that they send that up the ladder. And we get a lot of leverage that way because it's an internal message. I'm not pinging the C-suite or leadership to tell them, hey, we achieved some success in this part of your organization, but rather an internal spokesperson is forwarding that message up to let them know the value that their team gained.
Yeah, I love that. You know, I've worked the process even to take it a step further, Amanda, is I've ghostwritten emails for my champion to send up to the executive. So, and it was a template that we actually put in Gainsight. So they would just make a couple edits and send it up to their boss. And all it did was kind of make them look good and make us look good, but it didn't even look like it was coming from us. So the champion's really happy with us. And we're really happy because the champion didn't realize it, but they're actually buying for us, which is way better than us buying for ourselves. So I've seen that to a lot of success.
Yeah, and just to add to that really, really quickly, the immediate next response then generally when I follow up with the C-suite is, how do I replicate this? What other parts of your organization would benefit from something like this? And then they'll typically, you know, it's a short conversation, they're stretched thin, they don't have a lot of time to meet with you, but typically make an introduction to another part of the organization for you and just say, hey, this is Amanda, have a conversation with her and see about how you can replicate the success of that part of the org.
Yep. Awesome. So I don't have any hands up right now, so I'm going to ask kind of another question because I was really interested in Matt's question about measuring. Like, what metric do you use? How do you measure it? And then even taking it a step further, where do you measure it? So what tool do you measure it in? And for me, this is SMB, enterprise, this is everybody. I know there's a really hard way, you know, as a leader, you talk to your CSM, they think they have a great relationship with this champion, and then the champion cancels. And you're like, oh, I wish I had been able to better measure that. So I'm curious, does anybody have anything that they've successfully done? Gabriel?
Nothing that we do have a plan that we're working on. It's in our Q2 to Q3 plan. So I can share that, but it hasn't been deployed.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so obviously we have a qualitative analysis of the relationship. And on top of that, what we want to add is measuring Zendesk ticket type, and adding a metric to that, so that, okay, if we're getting, in the work that we do, if we're getting a ton of tickets, not necessarily a bad thing, but depending on how that ticket is being categorized, that definitely can be a red flag. So we want to use that as a metric, and we're working on that section. And then also we have a complaint or grievance submission system. We're a we're a healthcare benefit. We're a social benefit to Medicaid. So Medicaid members and healthcare facilities and legislators can submit grievances to our company through that, and that's separate from Zendesk. So we want to also use that as what are we getting here? Because I may be having a relationship with the champion or with a leader in the healthcare facility, and things seem fine there. But it could be that the unit secretary is submitting a ton of complaints, and that's going to work its way up, or the nurse practitioner is submitting a ton of complaints, and that's going to work its way up. So we also want to add a qualitative measurement to how many grievances are we getting from the different parties, and connecting those, because you could be, I'm trying to put these in terms that maybe help, like you could be part of a larger umbrella organization, right? And so if your sister facilities are submitting grievances, even though you're not, that's still a red flag for you. Because during your team meetings or large organizational meetings, that there's going to be a trickle effect in that. And we see that happen a lot, them discussing and, oh, we have those issues too, and kind of fueling the fire.
Right.
So that's what we're working on. And we do have ways to manually get that information, and we're just looking at ways to automate that solution. Yeah.
Gotcha. Dan Reese from Higher Logic, do you have any thoughts on kind of how you guys measure your relationships?
Yeah, so in terms of measuring the relationships, really, sure, there's a variety of different ways, but one of the things that we want to do is try to formulate a standardized set of stakes in the ground, if you will. So we're a SaaS business, so one obvious unit of measure is usage. So are customers using the tool, or are they not using the tool? So in the perpetual software, it's a little harder to determine if something is shelfware. It's super easy to do that in a SaaS environment. So if you look at usage and then you look at activity as another component. So activity could be, outbound calls from sales, from customer success, from support, and there's a correspondence, albeit good or bad correspondence, but a correspondence nonetheless. That means the channel of communication is open. So there's another unit of measure there that you can look at. And then with that also comes spending patterns. So what we've started to uncover even recently, where we have customers that will push back on certain spend, such as due to COVID, and then we will have a small arbitration panel to determine if we want to try to provide relief. But then if we're in tune with sales and we find out that they're also talking to sales about expansion, well, then it's a bit of a hypocrisy. You can't be reducing a footprint and then expanding on the other end. So, but by staying connected internally, you could detect that. If we were siloed, we wouldn't see that, and we'd be working against ourselves. Right. And so those are, to me, even if a customer is mad, but if they're expressing the fact that they're mad, whether it's online or verbally, it's still a channel of communication. It's the quiet customer that worries me.
Yeah, me too. Sometimes detractors are my favorite because I can turn a detractor around, but I can't turn somebody around that won't even talk to me. So I have some thoughts, it sounds like everybody's really measuring this via some more traditional health metrics. Is anybody segmenting like usage or anything based on the user? So they expect the executive to do these things, they expect the champion to do these things, and they expect the end user to do these things, so that you can really break apart that single threaded relationship. I might call on someone to see if they're doing that. I think Jorin, hopefully I pronounced that right.
Yeah, that's fine. We actually don't do that. We did, but then we stopped doing it just because it became too difficult in the health score. So we first had that, and then it just didn't work out. So we went back to only one metric. For us is usage. We show which company has been on your website, and I want to see how many leads have been opened per month, basically. So that's our usage. So for us, having multiple users in there is just going to get the health score up quicker. So I guess just add like on things which are being mentioned, as in, for example, with sales handover, we have a node which goes from Pipedrive to our customer success system, where we don't want to know everything. What sales has been discussed, we only want certain things, where, for example, one of the questions will be, who are the primary contacts? So that's what we want to know, and then we can build upon that. And I guess like one thing like we found out in our data is that the best clients we have retention wise are clients who have like users within multiple departments. So we found that in our numbers. So we're driving that everywhere. So in sales, in product, in CS. So you will see add users in the onboarding, add users in the app, add users in like our emails. We're not charging extra for it because we know our retention will go up. So it's a goal for ourselves, but also for product, for example. And like one thing I wanted to add to the comments before, as in like with the health score, we have the number, and what I'm doing right now is actually having the CSMs at the end of every month fill out an account mood. So how likely do they think that account is going to churn, yes or no? And I'm actually using that to create forecasts for churn prediction for next month. So I'm basically using that information instead of the health score to see what is going to be the churn next month. And I did it 2 months now. It is working pretty well. There are some flaws still in there, but it gives me like really control in what is going on. And I can go back to my data guy saying, okay, well, maybe you need to change your health score because of this, basically. So I wouldn't trust only the numbers.
Yep. Is anybody using success plans to better understand the goal of not just the client, but also the goal of each of the relationships? I'm seeing a little bit in the chat. I can't keep up entirely, but I'm seeing a little bit in the chat that, you know, champion by champion and organization by organization. And that sounds a little bit like success plans to me. So I was wondering if anybody else is doing that successfully. Jay, I'm not sure who asked that question or who was giving advice in the chat. Scroll back through that.
That was Santa. So Santa, I don't know if you'd like to elaborate on that. And your comment here is really good about sort of building up your main champion so that they can go to their boss on your behalf.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just saying that, you know, I've seen this be done pretty effectively, both in other software companies that I am the champion for, as well as, you know, helping the CSM to be, to work with their champions. But yeah, I think it can be really effective if you work directly with your champion to understand what matters most to the C-suite and the leadership team, and what business goals and metrics that they're trying to achieve. Nobody would understand that better than the person that is working directly with the C-suite and is essentially your middleman to them. So working more closely with them to define what that means to them, and then utilizing that as a platform. So once you have either via email and doing onboarding updates and status updates, or just if you have the opportunity to do an actual EBR, then that gives you the opportunity to also champion your champion by showing how much that person was pivotal in meeting these business goals. And so it kind of works out both ways in that way. And it's been really interesting to see the success of that.
Yeah. What tool do you use to document down that the champion's feedback and goals, and how do you kind of make sure there's transparency and follow up on it?
Yeah, so we utilize Salesforce and Churn Zero. And on the Salesforce side, it's really helpful because that's our communication into, you know, sales, as well as setup and implementation, and making sure that communication is consistent. And then on the Churn Zero front, it's really helpful for documentation, follow-up, and just ensuring that there's a consistent cadence in communication and just documentation in general.
Right. Okay. One question that I think is, well, I'm hearing a lot about champions, right? So we've got to have a champion there. What happens when a champion leaves? And there was a question asked about this. So what happens when you have a relationship turnover? Rob asked that. does anybody have good plans that they use when they've had relationship turnover? How do they deal with it? I know this is a big one, and I've seen it done a ton of different ways. So I'd love to get some opinions about how you've done it successfully at your organization. Laura? Oh, go ahead, Robert.
I can say one thing. Like one thing we have been doing is now adding like all our champions on LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So you're going to be the first one to know if they actually switch jobs, because if you're going to switch job, the first thing you're going to change is your LinkedIn profile. So even though they don't tell you, you will get a notification. And then maybe you can even get notifications if you follow the company, if a new marketing manager or whoever you're looking for joined the team.
Yep, that's a simple way, but you're right. How about Laura? I was going to call on you originally. I think you raised your hand.
I was going to say that I think in my experience, what I've seen is really key to, you're losing that one champion and now you're getting another one. And the thing that seemed to always fall through the cracks was making sure that that new person has the same level of expertise and comfort with the system, because so many times, and my background is SaaS in the education world, but they get the 5-minute handoff, person who's leaving is like done and they're out the door. And then they just know the little things that they have to do their job. And if we don't proactively, get them the training they need so they see the value, then it's going to fail. And I think that's one of the most overlooked things when you get that switch on the champion.
Yeah, so I'm going to use your expertise to ask one more question. How have you successfully made sure that you're kind of onboarding the new champion? Do you have like a training plan, or what tools have you used to do that successfully?
Well, I think one of the things is identifying that there has been, right? Because if you're scaled and you've got a lot of coming and going, that's going to be really difficult. So I think some system tools and things like somebody mentioned using something in Salesforce to keep track of that, that's key. And then depending on, I think developing a custom training plan for them, if they're a high touch person, is totally in line. And also, again, it begins to establish that relationship. If it's, if it's a low touch or tech touch model, then it can be something that's identified. But I think if they're key, they do deserve at least a reach out, a personal reach out, and get them, in addition to the nuts and bolts of what they have to do, get them more so they see the value right.
Yeah, even creating a playbook that your CSMs can use very quickly to re-engage and have like a training plan even available for your CSMs. That's a great idea. Gabrielle.
Yeah, so my experience here is that, I think when a champion is leaving, it just highlights again the importance of actually having a relationship with the individual. Ziv from AppsFlyer talks about this all the time, and I think it's just spot on at building that strong relationship and a long-term relationship with them, because unless something unexpected happens, which can happen during COVID-19, if I have a strong relationship with that champion, then I'm gonna know that the change is coming, and I'm gonna know when that change is coming. And if I have a strong relationship with them, they're gonna introduce me to if the next person is already there, or the interim person is there, which it does tend to happen a lot, right? Like this person is going to take over while the new one is onboarded and so on. I can already start working on a real nice handoff in between champions or in between points of contact. So I just feel like actually having a relationship with the person that is professional and just friendly gives you a lot of advantage when that transition is happening. And the other one is having more than one champion, right? Which to me, in the work that we do has been highly important, because there's just so many different roles and even sub industries per se. So I always look to have at least 2 or 3 different champions. And I, to Lauren's question, which I really liked it, is how do you strategize how to approach that? Because you can't have strong relationships with all of them. It's not sustainable. And then how do you strategize that? So we definitely go into, not go off topic. I feel like having more one champion, definitely a strategy that I use. And yeah, keeping a constant conversation with them. I had it so that when champions were leaving, they let me know. And when I was leaving my last job, I had calls just to say goodbye. No, we talked about everything. We
Yeah.
handed over everything. It was just, have a good one. Let's stay in touch. You know, it's been great working with you. I feel like if you make that a goal, then that's going to make it smoother.
Yeah. You know, I've even seen champions, who's to say a champion can't take you with them to the next organization too, if you
Yep.
keep a good relationship. It's actually a lead there. Kathleen, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I want to echo the sentiments of, at the end of the day, like my biggest goal is just to make my clients my besties. We have regular communication. I'm there for them. It would be really strange for me to not know, unless they're just somebody who's like completely dropped off the face of the earth. I think one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the power of, adding every single client on LinkedIn, following what they're doing and seeing if they're doing a webinar, jump in there. I've been able to use that and leverage that, in the past, and it's been really, really successful. And really, as far as actually if the champion's leaving, what I've done is just finding out, okay, when are you leaving? And also showing concern, hey, I want to make sure that all the hard work that you've done building this process with your team is easily handed over to the next person. So, getting an introduction as soon as they're on board, even just hey, let's just have a quick call, but, let's schedule something more formal a few weeks out because you're going to be busy getting onboarded, and really showing care and concern with the new person, because if you don't do that, it does put it at risk. But I think that at the end of the day, if you're doing everything with concern for the customer at heart, it's any good thing is any bad thing can potentially be an opportunity for you to just gain even more champions.
Right. Yep. I absolutely agree. Just personalizing the relationship, it makes you a person to them, so they're going to be more engaged with you. So we've only got a couple minutes left, so I wanted to really hit on Brian's question, more about tools. What tools are you using, as far as maybe even technology, but even beyond that, do you have a worksheet that your team fills out? What training have you done with your team? So what tools are you really using to make more robust relationships with champions and then create new relationships?
I'll speak up here while people are thinking about that. There's a couple of things that come to mind for me. And again, I think part of the challenge that we have here is everybody wants to build a strong relationship with their champion, but when you have 1,000 clients in the long tail of your customer base, right, it's hard to do that. And so one of the things that I've seen that I'm interested if others are doing as well is just using, whether it be Salesforce or some other tool where you're just tracking all the communications that you have back and forth with the customer, like recency tracking. So how long has it been since we had a logged interaction with a contact, and be able to sort of look at that broadly across the customer base. That's one thing. And then the other thing is I got a chance to look at people.ai the other day. Brian, I don't know if you've seen it up close and personal, but I was sort of blown away by some of the stuff that they could do there. And basically what it does is takes the graph of all the communications and all the meetings that are being scheduled with the sales team, the customer success team, any other organization or team member in your business that's touching a customer, and it starts to build a graph of all those interactions and communications across your organization. So it actually does what I said a minute ago. It sort of bubbles up where you've been having digital communication and it's, at least documented there versus where you haven't. So I think there's a whole area of tools that have been utilized in the sales and prospecting process that haven't quite made their way all the way over to customer success yet. And they're actually maybe even a little expensive for CS teams who don't have the same types of budgets that sales teams have. So I'm just curious if other people have seen that or tried any of the tools that their sales team are using in parallel to the CRM and the CSM platform.
I saw some head nodding. Jake, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this. I saw you nodding your head.
Hi everyone. I would love if there's a way to track interactions and be able to kind of put them on a graphical representation to kind of see how those interactions actually correlate with retention rates, as well as any other type of KPIs such as onboarding scores and health scores and so forth. So I'm really interested in that. We do ask our CSMs to actually track their interactions with their clients, with our subscribers in Salesforce. So to actually see or track those interactions through some sort of a graph to be able to understand a little bit better the engagement each of our CSMs have with their key clients or key subscribers will be an interesting one to see.
Yeah, make it a little more metric database,
Exactly.
which is
Yes.
my like favorite thing in the entire world. It's interesting. I think I might throw actually that question up in the Gain, Grow, Retain community, because I think there's probably some enterprise organizations, to Jay's point, that might have the money for the larger tools, but might be doing it a different way too. So I'll throw that up there since we're getting called back to the original session. So thanks everybody.
Gabriel, good to see you as well. Dan, Willow, Lauren Mecca, good to see you. Jay, good to see you. Looks like we're getting a few more people back in here. Awesome. Hope everybody's having a good Thursday. All right, looks like we're back. Austin Shrum, that beard is nice work.
Austin, the beard's a hit.
Yeah, you came across the screen and I just had to call it out. Awesome. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the session today. We'll go ahead, maybe kick it over. David Ellen, if you don't mind, maybe coming off mute and sharing a couple of things from the enterprise section. You know, I think there was maybe a sub-focus around relationship mapping, how we're make sure, you know, to get to the right areas of the right account. So maybe pop over and tell us a little bit about what you heard.
Yeah, we had some great comments about the different types of components that need to be considered when you're building your relationship map. Things around looking at who's influencers, who are blockers, who are people that come to meetings but don't really do anything, and who are the doers. I know Andreas talked about political influence in your map, who influences others on a political basis, and looking specifically to where you see gaps and trying to fill those gaps in your relationship map. That was one really good conversation. And then we also had a great conversation around escalation structures and making sure that in your relationship map, you're building in multi-tier relationships so that if you hit a challenge with somebody, how do you get to that next level? How do you move that relationship, or do you target somebody else and go to that other person and be able to keep the conversation going? It's really good conversation around that.
Awesome. Was there, just curious, from your perspective, David, was there talk of where to track this or how to keep track of this on a regular basis? Anybody have any interesting thoughts just around maybe technologies or spreadsheet or anything where they were kind of keeping this as they went forward?
Yeah, there were some interesting technologies. Most of them I had not heard about. One is called Lucid Chart, and a couple of people had used it in the past. Some people still use it as a way to visualize a relationship map. Another one is Demand Farm, which I wasn't familiar with either. And then a third one that I heard was called, looking for the name of it.
The org?
Well, the org was one of them. One of the pieces of conversation that we had was trying to figure out how to scrape LinkedIn information about people moving, relationships, people changing jobs, and then bringing that back into relationship maps.
Yeah, that's great.
And
Awesome.
I can tell you, I have used Altify before. Altify has an account planning process that has a visual relationship map built into it with color coding. Also a good tool.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, David.
Sure.
Willow, let's kick it over to you. You know, from the SMB side of things, I think one of the challenges that we always hear about is, you know, kind of smaller account size, might only have a single relationship that we're really relying upon. So curious what you heard in the SMB room on maybe how to get outside of just a single relationship.
Yeah, I think one of the main things we heard is actually use that relationship to expand within that organization. So rather than going above your champion or around your champion, use your champion to facilitate the relationships with your higher ups. We also heard kind of what happens when that champion leaves. So creating a personal relationship with that champion is really important in the SMB orgs. And then you might know they're leaving before they leave. And then if they leave, be a partner in their new and with the new person that comes on to make them your champion from the beginning. You know, do a training plan, do an onboarding plan so they can get kind of back in there. It was really leveraging the champion rather than trying to create a relationship above them. Use them to kind of tout your success, kind of. Another thing that we really harped on was you can't do it all, right? So we need automation and tools, even as simple as having the sales team write down who your champions are so you can port that over into your CS platform so that you know that stuff. And that's a huge win, and it's going to kind of move everything a little bit faster. It was interesting, David, that you mentioned tools, because the last thing I said was, I think I'm going to throw up in the community what tools everybody's using, because it seems like we in the SMB group could use some suggestions on tools. We've been shying away from it because they're kind of sometimes expensive. So the main tool people are talking about is LinkedIn. But I'm wondering which of those tools might work for the SMB group too.
Yeah, no pun intended, but one of the things I would recommend would be to, we were only able to scrape the surface on the tools conversation. Go over to Gain, Grow, Retain, and let's start a conversation about tools for relationship mapping, both on the SMB side and on the enterprise side. I think we can get much deeper there.
That's great.
Yeah, I agree.
And Willow, I like the point too that you mentioned about thinking about the new, you know, as we have somebody leaving the organization who's been a champion, who's even been a power user or anything, trying to find who's going to be the replacement of that person and how do we start building the relationship even before they move into that seat. I think sometimes it often goes overlooked, but you know, thinking about almost like its own transition plan, right? And treating it almost as if it's coming over as a new sale, and making sure we're thinking about that. So awesome. Well, thank you, David and Willow, for leading those sessions. You know, again, just to hit on a couple of things before we hop off real quick. As Jay mentioned, we've got our diversity and inclusion group, or committee, excuse me, that's going to be starting to form here going forward. So if you do want to play a part in that, please reach out to us. We're going to have a kind of an email distribution. We're going to have a regular scheduled meeting. We're going to have some action that we're going to drive behind that group, as well as the group that attended that yesterday. If there is interest of trying to be the committee lead, again, reach out to us as well. We'd love to make that a formal part of the Gain, Grow, Retain community, and make that something, again, that is very action oriented. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, we have Gain, Grow, Retain. So if you have an account, that's great. If you don't, feel free to go over and sign up. There's a great discussion that's happening, pretty much discussion happening daily. New posts going in. I think there's 30 or 40 posts that are happening a day, and just activity that we think is great in trying to keep the communication between these meetings going. So feel free to go do that. Feel free to invite people as well. We're trying to bring, again, more people into that discussion, more diversity. We're trying to bring just different opinions. As we know from customer success, it doesn't, you know, there's not one size fits all. I tend to think that there's opportunities for us to learn from every situation. So please keep doing that. And as always, we'll see you next Thursday at 11:30 a.m. and appreciate everybody joining.
Say bye. Awesome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Everybody, good to see you.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.